Let's fly to Milton for arrival. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This video is an add-on to the video called Delta A321 from MSP to LaGuardia Airport and focuses on a stunning daytime approach to LaGuardia. In this video, I only focus on the approach and landing for my flight, and I provide a very detailed commentary on how you can get a rewarding view of Manhattan at a low altitude. If you want to see the full flight, there's a link to it in the description below. This approach is quite possibly the best approach in the world, so it warrants its own video, so come along with me as I land at LaGuardia. Because the wind is coming from the southeast today, I made sure that I sat on the right side of the plane because conditions are favorable for landing on runway 22 with a right turn towards the runway, offering superb views. We're now approaching the New York City area from the west, and all arrivals from this direction follow a standard terminal arrival route called the Milton 4 arrival, which brings all arrivals from the west to a point just south of the city where flights will merge with flights from the south into a single stream towards New York. While over Pennsylvania, we descend and head southeast. We're passing by the Lehigh Valley International Airport in Pennsylvania before entering the state of New Jersey at around 10,000 feet. From here, we head to the area of New Jersey just south of Sandy Hook Bay, where we'll then head north towards New York City. The following uninterrupted video begins over the lower New York Bay of New York, all the way to landing. We are currently being controlled by an approach controller in the New York Terminal Radar Approach Control Facility, or TRACON, located in Garden City, New York. In the distance is Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and below us is the lower Bay of New York. We have been cleared down from 7,000 feet, staying above flights from Newark, to 4,000 feet. Our descending altitude also keeps us clear of southbound departing flights from LaGuardia that have gained altitude on their climbouts. We're headed towards the Verrazano Bridge, which connects Staten Island to Brooklyn, and will stay over the upper Bay of New York City and head towards the Hudson River. We can see Coney Island and Brooklyn off of our right window. The quickest way to get to LaGuardia today would be to turn about 20 degrees to the right and land on runway 4, but because we need to land into the wind, we will land on runway 22, which is in the opposite direction. So we will pass by LaGuardia Airport to the west. We remain west of LaGuardia because departures are using airspace to the east off of runway 13, and as we get closer to the airport, it's important to stay clear of the departing flights during their initial climb out. If the wind is out of the southeast, arrivals to runway 22 will generally pass to the west of LaGuardia, and if the wind is out of the southwest, runway 22 arrivals will be to the east of LaGuardia because runway 31 would be used for departures, and this would be in LaGuardia's western airspace. We'll maintain this 4,000 altitude until we're past Manhattan so we can allow smaller aircraft flying visually up and down the Hudson River to enjoy their views of Manhattan. Our flight crew has been asked by New York Approach Control to follow the Hudson River northbound, so we're navigating just by looking out the window. If the visibility was lower, we might have received a heading to fly by from ATC, and that actually might not take us directly over the Hudson River, so we're lucky today that the visibility is good enough to allow us to fly directly over the Hudson. And this makes for a breathtaking approach with a great view of Manhattan. Now you can see why I chose the right side of the airplane today, and to make things even better, my flight is landing in the late afternoon, so the sun is in the west on the other side of the airplane. Manhattan is 13 miles long, and it's going to take us 2.5 minutes to fly its entire length today, and we are going to be doing it all at 4,000 feet. We'll be given clearance to descend to a lower altitude once we're past the sightseeing flights below us. We're now approaching Midtown Manhattan, and most passengers are fixed on the views of the skyscrapers. Just look at the cluster of buildings and how dense everything is. While everyone is enjoying the view, air traffic controllers are keeping an eye on the radar, ensuring that our pilot is following the slight bend to the right of the Hudson River. There's also a lot going on above us. Flights departing Newark that are headed towards the northeast climb above 4,000 feet over the Hudson River in New York City, and in the same airspace, flights that are departing LaGuardia that are headed south and west also use the same airspace. In full view is Central Park. As you can see, it is very easy to see from the air as it's an oasis of green among a sea of concrete, and for this very reason, the fact that it's so noticeable, the park is used as a visual reference point for sightseeing flights over New York City below our altitude. Small planes and helicopters will work with controllers to often fly over Central Park, either for fantastic views or to travel east or west to get to their destination. Here we can see LaGuardia Airport. You can clearly see our landing runway, runway 22, which juts into the bay, and runway 13, which is being used for departures. These departures will head in the opposite direction of where we are after takeoff, so they don't interfere with arrivals like this flight that I'm on right now. As we continue north along the Hudson River, we can see the New York City borough of the Bronx on the other side of the Harlem River. We've got a great view of Yankee Stadium, home of the New York Yankees baseball team. The current stadium opened in 2009, replacing the original stadium from 1923. We just passed directly over the George Washington Bridge. It's actually not being used as a landmark by our flight crew, as all we were told to do was follow the Hudson River northbound. It's only visible from the cockpit as we're flying directly over it, but it is also used as a landmark for the smaller aircraft that are flying below us. We're now approaching the north tip of Manhattan and the Spuyten Duyvil Creek. We've covered all of Manhattan in such a short period of time. Just think how long that trip would take by car along the West Side Highway of Manhattan. We've been asked by the approach controller to turn right to a heading of 50 degrees, which is a barely noticeable turn since it's generally the same direction the river heads in, but it's a specific direction that the controller has given us so that we can fit into the pattern of arriving aircraft. We're now being issued a heading of 90 degrees or due east to align us behind the aircraft in front of us, so we make a bank 40 degrees to the right to stay behind the previous traffic. There's an Embraer 170 in front of us, and the 90-degree heading puts us in a good position to be able to follow this aircraft. We're also clear of the Hudson River and all of the small airplanes below, so we've been asked to descend to 3,000 feet. We're also told to reduce our speed to 180 knots to ensure sufficient separation. We're now over lower Westchester County, just north of the Bronx. How far out we go depends on how much traffic is coming in, and today traffic is rather light, so we don't have to go too far out. Here, I'm zooming the camera into LaGuardia Airport, and you can see runway 22, which juts into the water. The pilot should also be able to see the airport and the runway from the cockpit. There's also a second stream of arrivals to runway 22 that comes from the north and basically heads straight in towards runway 22 along Interstate 95, but at this moment, there are no airplanes coming in from that direction, so we can get in quicker. At this point, the controller asks the pilot if he can see the Embraer 170. The answer is yes, and we're told to follow the aircraft to the runway and are cleared for a visual approach to runway 22. Our pilot will maintain visual separation between our aircraft and the aircraft ahead all the way to touchdown. The nice weather today is helping make this visual approach possible. Our right-hand turn to join the final approach course occurs over the city of New Rochelle, New York. New Rochelle is named after La Rochelle, France, and is the 7th largest city in the state of New York. And from an air traffic perspective, it's generally in the airspace where runway 22 arrivals are all lined up with the runway, whether they're approaching from the east, west, or straight in. The approach controller has done their job by this point and has successfully set us up for the approach, and in this case, our approach is a visual approach. If an instrument approach were in use, the controller would have provided a heading to intercept the instrument landing system, but that was not necessary today. All we have to do is follow the Embraer in front of us all the way to the runway. We are making final adjustments to line up with the runway, and once we level the wings, we'll be on a heading of around 225 degrees, which is the heading of runway 22. That's a southwest heading. We're still in Westchester County, and we'll enter the Bronx and New York City in just a few short moments. We're approaching the downtown area of New Rochelle with its numerous tall buildings. It's at this point where we are asked to change our radio to the frequency of the LaGuardia Airport Control Tower. The controller in the tower sees us on the radar and clears us to land behind the Embraer ahead of us. The controller is also monitoring traffic in the area to ensure that as we descend, we are clear of any other aircraft such as helicopters that often transverse the area at a low altitude. As we descend towards the runway, we're paralleling Interstate 95, which runs from Florida to Maine. The other side of the airplane offers views of the Long Island Sound and Long Island in the distance. We're now entering the Bronx and are passing over Pelham Bay Park, the largest park in the city of New York. It's more than 3 times the size of Central Park, which we flew by while flying northbound on the Hudson River. The large buildings that you see are Co-op City. Co-op City is the largest cooperative housing development in the entire world. The river by Co-op City is the Hutchinson River, a 10-mile river that starts in Westchester County in Scarsdale and flows towards Eastchester Bay. Our aircraft's landing gear is in the down position and we're all set to land on runway 22. We'll be on the ground shortly. Before we land, I want to quickly discuss the 2 different types of approaches to runway 22 for arrivals from the south and west. Today, we flew up the Hudson River on the west side of LaGuardia to get to the final approach course. Sometimes aircraft will fly on the east side of the airport and Manhattan will be on the left side of the airplane and from a distance. While there are exceptions to this rule, generally when the wind is coming from between 220 and 130 degrees, you can expect to fly west of LaGuardia over the Hudson River and make a right turn to the final approach course, which is what happened today. When the wind comes from between 220 and 310 degrees, you can expect to fly east of LaGuardia and make a left turn to the final approach course. The reason for this is because the crossing runway, runway 1331, needs to be used for departures. Just like landing airplanes, departing airplanes also need to fly into the wind, and these headings allow both arrivals and departures to fly into the wind by keeping runway 22 as the landing runway, but changing the direction of departing flights on runway 1331. When runway 13 is in use, the airspace to the east of LaGuardia is occupied by departures, and when runway 31 is in use, the airspace to the west of LaGuardia is occupied by departures. So that is how a left or right turn to the runway is determined. We are now over the Castle Hill section of the Bronx and are all set to land on runway 22 and are fully configured for touching down. The Embraer 170 that was ahead of us has landed and is fully clear of the runway. Runway 13, which crosses runway 22, is the departure runway, which is, of course, why we made the right turn before we landed, and is clear of all departing flights. So, we continue on over the East River as we enter the borough of Queens. The runway is directly ahead of us, and the first portion of the runway is actually located on a pier on top of the water. We won't actually be on solid land until we cross the intersection of runway 13. Just moments before touchdown, we see Rikers Island off the right side. Rikers Island is home to a jail complex and is actually part of the Bronx, even though it's closer to Queens and connected to Queens by a bridge. As we touch down on runway 22, notice that there's an aircraft waiting in position to take off on runway 13. The aircraft is waiting for us to land before the tower issues takeoff clearance. You can see how this aircraft will take off toward the east, which is why we flew west of LaGuardia with those great views before we turned toward the airport. Runway 22 is 7,001 feet long and 150 feet wide. As we slow down, we can feel the deceleration as we try to get off the runway as quickly as possible so that the next airplane can land. Today, we'll be using the next to last taxiway to vacate the runway.
It's our pleasure to welcome to New York City's LaGuardia Airport, where the approximate local time is 4:32 p.m. For your continued safety, please remain in your seats with your seatbelt fastened until we are safely parked at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off.
As we vacate the runway, the controller tells us to switch radio frequencies to the ground controller, who is also located in the tower. The ground controller tells us which taxiways to take to get to Terminal C today, and within a few minutes, our flight will be complete. What an amazing approach that was. It absolutely pays off when you know which side of the airplane to sit on. Well, I hope you learned something from this video. It's always a thrill to fly into New York City, and I hope I was able to help you out the next time you fly to New York so you can pick the best seats so you can get the best view for yourself. If you want to watch the entire flight aboard this A321 from boarding in Minneapolis to deplaning at LaGuardia, I've got a link in the description below. As with all of my videos, I fully narrate the entire flight. Well, I'm just thrilled to have flown New York's #1 airline to what I believe is the #1 approach in the entire world. As always, I thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned for more detailed videos like this, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Take care.